Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at what has to be one of the greatest, yet, honestly, most heartbreaking stories in all of American invention. When you hear the name Goodyear, what pops into your head? You're probably picturing those giant blimps hovering over football stadiums, right? Or maybe high-performance racing tires, or just this massive, multi-billion-dollar global brand. But the actual reality behind the man who gave that company its name, it's a stark, almost unbelievable contrast. We're going to look at a guy who literally starved to change the world, only to leave behind a legacy of just massive, tragic irony. Okay, let's dive into this with a bit of a trick question. Who actually founded the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company? Well, if you guessed Charles Goodyear, you'd be entirely wrong. It's a super common misconception, but the man whose name is literally stamped on millions of tires across the globe, he had absolutely zero involvement in starting the tire giant. None at all. The modern Goodyear company was actually founded by a guy named Frank Seiberling, along with his brother in Akron, Ohio, back in 1898. And get this, they started out making things like horseshoe pads, poker chips, and bicycle tires. But Charles Goodyear, the inventor of the rubber process that made all of those products possible in the first place, he had died almost 4 decades earlier in 1860. And he didn't die a wealthy industrialist. No, he died completely destitute, drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So to understand how that massive disconnect happened, we really have to jump back to the beginning. Section 1, the rubber fever problem, a massive roadblock. So the fatal flaw of natural rubber, or India rubber as it was called back then, was just its absolute instability. It's essentially a milky sap drained from tropical trees and coagulated with acid. And in the 1830s, entrepreneurs caught this massive rubber fever. They were trying to make everything from life preservers to shoes out of the stuff, but there was a huge problem here. Natural rubber was soft and it was incredibly sticky. In the cold, it would stiffen up and literally crack into pieces. And in the summer heat, it melted. In fact, Charles Goodyear once got a contract to make rubber mailbags for the U.S. Post Office in Boston, and when the weather got hot, every single one of them completely melted into this reeking, sticky, worthless paste. I mean, the whole industry was teetering on the verge of total ruin. But Goodyear, he just couldn't let it go. He was absolutely convinced he could fix this material, which led him into a really desperate series of early experiments. I mean, he sold off his furniture, moved his family into quiet boarding houses and cramped attics. At certain points, his family was so incredibly poor they only survived by catching frogs and digging up half-frozen potatoes. The human cost here was just devastating. 2 of his toddler sons actually died during this period of extreme poverty. Still, he kept experimenting. He tried mixing the rubber with magnesia to take away the stickiness. He tried boiling it in quicklime and water. He even walked 3 miles every single day to a mill in Greenwich Village to test out this super harsh nitric acid cure. Now, that acid cure actually won him a letter of commendation from President Andrew Jackson, but the toxic acid generated in his lab nearly suffocated him, bringing on a fever that almost killed him. And despite all of that suffering, the rubber, it still wasn't stable. Section 2, the vulcanization breakthrough, a turning point. And this brilliantly illustrates the turning point of our whole story. Picture this. It's 1839, and Goodyear is in Woburn, Massachusetts. He'd been relentlessly mixing rubber with sulfur, trying to find that perfect combination. And by sheer chance, during this really animated moment, some people actually say he was gesturing wildly to locals in a general store who were actively laughing at him. A lump of his sulfur-treated rubber flew out of his hand and landed right onto the hot surface of a pot-bellied stove. As he frantically scraped it off, he noticed something incredible. The rubber hadn't melted. It had hardened. It became remarkably tough and rigid, but it was still flexible. Heat, the very thing that used to completely destroy rubber, was actually the secret to curing it. So he spent the next 5 years obsessively perfecting the process, using tea kettles, ovens, and irons right inside his own home. He named this process vulcanization. Named after Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, vulcanization is basically this chemical process of pressure steaming rubber and sulfur together to make the material tough, pliant, waterproof, and totally temperature resistant. He finally locked down U.S. patent number 3633 for this exact process in 1844, and he envisioned a world where absolutely everything, banknotes, musical instruments, even clothes, would be made out of this miracle material. Section 3. Sowing without reaping. A tragic aftermath. Now, you would naturally think this is the part of the story where Goodyear becomes a multimillionaire, right? Sadly, no. It's probably best summed up by a massive number, $200,000. As soon as Goodyear finally perfected his process, rival rubber barons in the U.S. and abroad began blatantly stealing it left and right. He spent the rest of his life and frankly all of his money fighting these exhausting court battles just to protect his patents. He even lost his European patents on technicalities to British inventors like Thomas Hancock. Goodyear traveled all the way to Europe to demonstrate his invention, racked up massive debts, and actually ended up spending time in debtors' prisons in both England and France. Get this, he was actually awarded the highly prestigious Cross of the Legion of Honor from Napoleon III while he was physically locked up in a French jail cell. When he finally passed away in 1860, after collapsing in a New York hotel while traveling to see his dying daughter, he left his family behind with nearly $200,000 in debt. But despite a lifetime filled with poverty, severe illness, and just rampant legal theft, Goodyear's perspective was astounding. Reflecting on his life's work, he wrote, "I am not disposed to complain that I have planted and others have gathered the fruits. A man has cause for regret only when he sows and no one reaps." I mean, wow. He didn't measure his success in dollars and cents. He found a really deep peace in simply knowing that his invention was working, that it was actually benefiting humanity, even if he personally never saw a single dime of the profits. Section 4. The Wingfoot Legacy. An Immortal Name. Let's move to and see how this builds. You see, when Frank Seiberling founded his tire company in 1898, he actively chose to name it after Charles Goodyear, just to honor the inventor's sheer, unbreakable dedication. Seiberling actually had this statue of Mercury, or Hermes, in his Akron home, and that is what inspired the famous Wingfoot logo, symbolizing speed, commerce, and forward motion. You can track how the logo evolved over time. It goes from its really industrial, monochrome roots in 1988 to adding a yellow shadow for better visibility in the 1930s. Then it transitioned to this sleek navy blue in the 1940s as the company expanded heavily into aviation and motorsports, until finally becoming the iconic, globally recognized yellow on blue standard we all know today, which they finalized in 1968. That winged foot on a tire, it represents the very resilience and reliability that Charles Goodyear literally gave his life to discover. Which brings us to the ultimate immortality of a penniless inventor. It is just a profound historical irony, isn't it? A man whose family literally dug for half-frozen potatoes, a man who repeatedly sat in foreign debtors' prisons, and whose health was completely destroyed by toxic chemicals, is now the namesake of a company pulling in billions of dollars every single year. Today, sure, about half of all rubber manufactured is synthetic, but none of the massive modern rubber industry would even exist without the profound sacrifices of Charles Goodyear. He starved to perfect a material he believed in, and today, his legacy flies high on blimps across the sky and races around tracks all over the world. It really makes you wonder, how many of the everyday conveniences we rely on were born from the quiet, totally unrecognized sacrifices of brilliant minds? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this changes the way you look at the tires on your car forever.